Now then, it's about time for us to continue on with this chapter. Next up, Sae was waiting for her. Okay, this should be interesting. Makoto hadn't contacted her initially out of sheer hubris. She'd thought that a little sojourn into whatever weird realm Morgana had found wouldn't last long, or if it did, then they'd emerge victorious, and that she'd be able to blunt any of Sae's lectures with the good news. Now she was slinking back into their apartment like a frail thief, empty-handed. She'd sent a single terse text before getting on the train, just so her sister would know she wasn't dead, but the rest she would have to endure in person. Sae Nijima had come a long way since she'd stepped away from the soul-eroding furnace that was SIU prosecutorial politics. Though stepped away was maybe putting it too lightly. Sauntered out in a blaze of glory would be more accurate. Masayoshi Shido had tried to align the entire department against her, but nearly every one of his co-conspirators had been burned when his heart had been stolen in the public, with a little deicidal coaxing had turned against him. Consequently, what remained of the SIU was now firmly in her corner. After the SIU's plot to frame her had come to light, she probably could have made the director with a little more pushing. But instead she'd settled, literally, for a hefty restitution fee in court, and invested it into a new career path as a defense attorney, focusing her efforts on the other side of the law. The pay wasn't as good in her new job, but she carefully budgeted the settlement to cover their basic needs, and the absence of that constant cutthroat ladder climbing had changed her considerably. She'd lost that desperate snappishness that had punctuated her and Makoto's early relationship. She came home to eat more often. But while she might have softened up a little bit, her new lease on life hadn't diminished the sharpness of her tongue, her merciless eye for detail, or the intensity of her glare. And Makoto got a front row seat to the ladder as soon as she stepped into their apartment. Sae was on the couch, in her robe, cell phone still in one manicured hand. She maintained her stare for several seconds longer than was comfortable. "I know you're a university student," she began, "so that means I should allow you a little more independence. But as long as you're living here, you should at least tell me if you're going to stay out so late, especially on nights like..." She stopped and looked forward. Leaned forward. "Makoto, what happened?" So it was that obvious. After all of her covert activities as a phantom thief had come to light, they'd made a promise between each other. No more secrets. Makoto thought that was slightly skewed in Sae's favor. When she wasn't distracted by work, she could detect lies with laser accuracy. But at least it simplified things for her now. She turned, locked the door, then opted for bluntness. "You remember Akira Kurusu, right?" she asked, facing Sae again. "It'd be hard to forget without a serious head injury. Why? Is he in some kind of trouble?" "He's dying," she said. "And Goro Akechi is sleeping in his old room." Silence. Sae's mouth remained slightly open. Then she stood up, stiffly, and made her way into the kitchen. "I'll put on some coffee," she said. Makoto was too tired to even protest. Sae would head around to Cafe LeBlanc in Persona 5 as well. I wonder if her coffee is as good as Sojiro's. As it turned out, she dodged at least one bullet. Sae decided at the last minute to make cocoa for Cocoa Puffs instead. "No, it's just hot cocoa." "Who loves hot cocoa?" Back to the story. They filled up their mugs with marshmallows and drained them at the kitchen table as Makoto filled her in. Sae spoke little throughout her explanation. Makoto suspected that, after her lengthy interrogation of Akira last year, she was used to this sort of thing. "We're going to regroup tomorrow morning," she finished. "I'm hoping that Akechi will be able to give us some insight on what to do next." "And they're treating you as a de facto leader." "That seems to be the case." She frowned and pulled her mug close. "I was fine with it before, but it's shocking how much different it is without Akira around. He didn't speak much when he was with us, but he always had the final say, you know? Now we're flying blind. I feel culpable for every misstep." She waved a hand. "That's just how you are, Makoto. It doesn't reflect your performance." "I hope so. My performance has felt pretty shoddy recently." "I seem to recall Kurusu saying he would trust us grown-ups to handle things from now on, but I guess it doesn't apply to supernatural pandemics." She sighed, brushed her hair away from her eye. "So, once again, the fate of the world is in the hands of people who can't even legally drink, plus one cat. It feels downright perverse. And that's to say nothing of Akechi himself. I'd given him up for dead." "We pretty much have him sequestered in that cafe right now. I don't think anyone noticed him going in. Do the police?" "Not to my knowledge. Shido kept Akechi's involvement under a very tight lid, and unlike the other conspirators, he didn't seem to have any blackmail on him either. No documentation or videotape, and the only recorded call I've heard was the one Futaba Sakura took when she tapped his phone." She pinched the bridge of her nose. The stress of that whole debacle still nipped at her from time to time. "I'm not a detective, but my guess is he was planning to eliminate Akechi as soon as he finished taking care of all of you. He could have said that Akechi's death was in pursuit of the final surviving phantom thief, and none would be the wiser. He could even use that excuse as justification to further whatever authoritarian agenda he had in mind. The Goro Akechi Act. Expanded surveillance and police state measures for all." Makoto recalled that goateed, contemptuous face. She imagined the cartilage of his nose collapsing like styrofoam beneath her knuckles. "I still have trouble believing someone so vile could even exist. He's an extreme case, but he's not that unusual. If you decide to follow in Dad's footsteps, you'll probably encounter many more just like him." She lowered her hand, regarded Makoto with something like pity. "Patterns of behavior reinforce themselves. If no one is around to interrupt them, the negative actions just keep spiraling further and further out of control, dragging people down, distorting them, to use your words. In Shido's case, it was pursuit of power. Who can say if he even knew why he wanted to control Japan so badly by the end? All of his rhetoric was just a mask for his own megalomania." "What do you think Akechi's distortion might have been?" Sae seemed taken aback at the question. "I mean, the two of you knew each other much longer than I did, and we are going to be working together in a sense. I still don't understand him at all." "You shouldn't even be making the effort," she said severely. "He tried to assassinate all of you. There's still no telling if he might—" Makoto's phone vibrated, loud as a truck engine in the solemn apartment. Both she and Sae nearly jumped out of their seats. "Who's calling at this godforsaken hour?" Makoto said. When she held up the phone and got her answer, her confusion just intensified. "Hello, Makoto. I'm downstairs. Could you buzz me up? I brought cake." "Ooh! Harubar cake!" "I love cake. I've been cutting down on it, so, But I still like birthday cakes. Birthday cakes are just delicious. Several minutes later, Haru was at their front door, bearing a small wrapped box and an apologetic expression. Rain droplets still clung to the fur ruff on her jacket. Good evening. Or morning. I'm not sure which is which right now. Can I come in? How'd you even get here, Haru? Makoto asked. The train stopped over an hour ago. I just took a cab. It wasn't any trouble. I would have showed up a little sooner, but Ann told me about this all-night bakery a while ago, and I thought it would be rude to visit without bringing anything, and, She held up the box like a warning against evil spirits. It's strawberry? Strawberry cakes are okay in my book, but I mostly prefer chocolate. Sae's voice emerged from the kitchen. Let her in, Makoto. Thank you very much. Sae brewed another mug of cocoa, not cocoa, and Haru divided up the little strawberry shortcake she brought. Strawberry shortcake. I haven't watched any episodes of that show, but, well, I think I've had a few strawberry shortcakes in the past. None of them had much appetite. Sitting around that table with their grave expressions, their terry drinks, and their uneaten cake, they looked like attendants at the world's saddest tea party. Yeah, this is like taking the Mad Hatter's tea party and turning it into a wake party. That's a bit of an insensitive analogy. I do apologize if it offends anyone. Moving on. I apologize for contacting you out of the blue like this, Haru said quietly. I knew right away that I wouldn't sleep well tonight. I didn't want to be on my own. And since the two of us are university students, I just thought our schedules would be... You don't have to make excuses, Haru, Makoto said. As you can probably see, insomnia has been going around a lot right now. Sae nodded. Makoto told me just about everything. We were in the middle of discussing Goro Akechi and his miraculous revival. Oh, I see. She sipped her drink. Conversation withered and died. Makoto stared down into the congealed remnants of her cocoa. The mini marshmallows were embedded in that slurry like flies in a trap, like pinprick stars. Who likes putting mini marshmallows in their hot chocolate? I've got to do that someday. Haru, can I ask you something? About Akechi? By all means. You have more cause to be angry at him than most of us after what he did to your father. But you've been kinder to him than anyone since we've met again. Do you think that there's something we misunderstood about him? That he might just be another victim of Shida's manipulation? I thought that was the case that everyone agreed on back in the original Persona 5. No, she said. He's disgusting. The Nijima sister's eyes widened. Haru's voice and choice of language were genteel as ever, but coming from her, that word sounded obscene as a shouted curse during Sunday Mass. Disgusting, she said again, as if sampling his flavor. I still think about what he did, and the way he acted around us before his betrayal came to light, and I just shudder, like a slug crawled over my hand. She tried to smile. Which happens more often than I care to admit with my gardening. You saw your father die on live television because of Akechi and Shido. Of course you have every right to feel that way. Then why... Do you remember what I said back in Shido's palace? It still holds true. I can't forgive him, but I can understand him. She set her mug down and pushed it away. When we chose to steal my father's heart, you all made the consequences clear to me. For a little while I didn't fully grasp the risks involved, until we first encountered his shadow, and that awful parody of the man he wanted me to marry. When the full depths of his callousness were revealed, I remember very clearly the thought that passed through my mind. Fine then, let them die. Her voice was low and firm. And at that moment, Melody came to me. So those words, that sentiment, that was the voice of my true self. Akechi is disgusting, but I still have no right to condemn him completely. The sisters exchanged an uneasy glance. They too sometimes wondered what had become of Sugimura. I'm calling it now. Either he pissed off, or Haru chopped him to pieces, put him into a body bag, and just found an incinerator to pop it in. Nevertheless, Sae said, the circumstances are quite different, wouldn't you say? Maybe, but that's not the only reason. She started toying with her sweater again. I'm not sure how to best explain it. Then don't. No one here is forcing you to talk. No, I think I'd like to get it off my chest. They stayed silent as Haru pieced her thoughts together. She pursed her lips. She ate a single forkful of cake. The sound of her chewing and swallowing was almost deafening. Then she began. I've been gardening for quite a long time. I was always a bit sheltered even before my father began to go wrong. But that was one hobby he'd let me indulge since I was young. We had a little plot on our penthouse roof. Tomatoes and cucumbers, that sort of thing. All I really had to do was water them every so often and pluck the weeds. My father would handle the tiresome business of planting seeds and fertilizing and such. He'd let me watch. She smiled at the memory. It was surrounded by a little mesh cage, like chicken wire, to keep away pests. Obviously, we didn't have to worry about raccoons and the like way up on the roof, but birds could still get in. They're very resourceful, you know. One day, when I was just 7 or 8, I went up to the garden on my own. It had been a while since I'd last given the plants any attention. My father was starting to become distant even back then. So I went to the plot with my watering can and saw that the mesh had become all tangled up. There was some kind of brownish clump stuck in the wire. I thought the wind had somehow blown leaves all the way up there. So I reached out my hand to pull them away, and my fingers sank into it. She shivered violently all over. It turned out to be a dead bird, still decomposing. It must have been hurt or sick and tried to get through the wire for some reason and couldn't get back out. I still remember it so clearly, that warm and slippery feeling. Poor bird. Makoto reached out to comfort her. Sae discreetly pushed her slice of cake away. I'm fine, Makoto, thank you. Obviously, I screamed blue murder. It was enough to summon my father from his office. He saw me in hysterics up on that rooftop, and he was furious. Forbade me from going up there again without supervision. He said I'd have to show some more backbone if I was ever going to inherit the Okumura estate. And he didn't ask what happened where the bird came from, or try to comfort you and ask someone to remove the bird from the mesh. That's terrible, Sae said. To say that to a child, it's quite hurtful, yes, Makoto said flatly. And Sae shut up. Several of her own comments made over this table were still a sore spot between the two of them. But he was wrong, Haru said. Finding that corpse up there was awful, yes, but it wasn't why I was crying. It's because I was late. Because I waited so long to go up there. I kept thinking of how it must have struggled to escape. I remember how bent and bloody one of its legs were, like it had tried to chew itself to pieces to get free. She shook her head and bent down low as if in confession. Over and over I kept thinking, if only I had come sooner. If only I had reached my hand out sooner. Maybe it wasn't my responsibility, but that bird had no one else, and neither does he. She sniffed and wiped her eyes. Makoto and Sae were at a loss for words. Eventually, Haru straightened back up, a trace of deep steel in her tone. If Akechi wants to atone, then so be it. I'm not going to forgive him, and as far as I'm concerned, no one else should. But I do believe his desire to help us is sincere, despite his ill intentions when last we met. It wouldn't be out of character for him, Sae said. We never got along very well at the SIU, and yet he always seemed reluctant to actually leave whenever we had to work together. Contrary, that's what he was. And even if his accomplishments as a detective were fraudulent, he never came off as unintelligent. If he really is crucial to your success, then I'll stay out of it. Hopefully by the time we meet again, Ryuji will have cooled down a little, Makoto said. Pardon me for the morbid subject, but you may have another concern, Sae said. Given the state of mind he's apparently in, as well as the consequences awaiting him even if he should succeed, there's a chance he may do something regrettable to himself. I don't believe so, Haru told her. Akechi had an entire year to die, yet he clung on all that time, in that horrible place. I can't guess at his reasons, but he seems determined to see this through. Then that leads to my other concern. She held up a finger. Sojiro Sakura. Oh, right. They took a moment to process this. What about him? Makoto asked. But she already had a feeling what Sae would say. He's a remarkably even-tempered man, but his family is a weak point. I learned that the hard way when I was following up on Wakabe Ishiki's research for the SIU. Right now, he's doubtless in a fragile state of mind, considering the trouble with Akira and Futaba. And the individual who murdered Futaba's mother is defenseless on his property. The other two girls' expressions had become quite ferocious, but Sae continued anyway. Sojiro is resourceful. If he wished, he could easily... He wouldn't, Haru snapped. Not ever. If we lose faith in boss of all people, we're doomed before we begin, Makoto agreed. So let's drop the subject, sis. Very well. Subject dropped. The atmosphere around the table had turned frosty. But a moment later, Haru dispelled it by yawning. She sounded like a kitten. I'm sorry, everyone. I must have kept you up even longer. It's no problem, Haru. Sis, can she take the couch? Certainly. Oh, but what about the cake? We all hardly touched it. I'll wrap it up, said Sae. You can have it for breakfast if you want. God knows this isn't the time to worry about your diet. Cake for breakfast? Wow. They said their goodnights and dispersed, but it still took a long time before any of them could fall asleep. They gathered their sheets around themselves, and hoped that solutions would present themselves in the light of dawn. But in these dark hours, only one image came to them. A bird tangled in wire, shackled by it, until in its final extremity it twisted his beak down to its useless limbs, and pecked, and pecked, and pecked. Poor birdie.